Private individuals do not have to deal with the media, and you need to use more sensitivity when interviewing them. All sources, public and private, want to be portrayed well in the media. Many sources, especially public officials, will manipulate reporters by revealing only information that furthers their cause. As a result, reporters need to be aware of the source's bias and ask probing questions that go beyond what the source wants to reveal. It is also crucial to check the information and seek alternative points of view. So there's a section on the pros and cons of digital recorders and videotape. I don't get too much into this because I always record my interviews. When I was a reporter for radio, it was going on the radio, so I'd have a microphone anyway. I always record interviews. I think it's good to do the same. If you guys have a phone, there's voice recorders on your phone, all sorts of different ways that you can record an interview. So there's a lot of listening tips before you write notes. There's this chapter talks a lot about writing notes, which you do a lot in print, and note taking is good too. Even if you are recording the interview, it is time consuming to go back and listen to that whole thing and transcribe it. So take notes while you do it and make notations as to at what point, if there's a timer, you can write at 2 minutes, he said this, and I really want to use that quote that person said. Okay, so there's listening tips, and conducting a good interview, you have to be a good listener. So before you write notes or record conversation, you should develop good listening skills, and here are some tips. Focus on the here and now. Concentrate on what the source is saying now. Try not to think about what you're going to ask next. You have to be in the moment and listening, because they might say something and then you want to do a follow-up onto what they just said. You're going to miss that if you're thinking about your next question. Practice conversational listening. Base your next question on the last sentence or thought the source expressed, as though you were having a conversation with a friend. Practice critical listening. Evaluate what the source is saying as you hear it. Be quiet. Do not try to impress the source with what you know, because it's not about you. I had great advice from an SU professor when I was interviewing him, and I was talking about an issue, and I was trying to relate to that issue to get the professor to respond. So I was telling the professor everything I thought about this issue and what I thought about that. And he stopped me and he said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. Nobody cares what you think." And it was a great piece of advice. He was absolutely right. We don't care what the reporter thinks, because you can't quote yourself, like it says here. Let the source explain a point, even if you understand it, so you can get information in the source's words. Be responsive, make eye contact frequently so your source knows you're listening. Listen for what isn't said. Is the source avoiding a topic? Listen with your eyes. What kind of body language is the source displaying? Is the source smiling, frowning, or exhibiting discomfort when you ask certain questions? Be polite. Block personal intrusions. If you're having a bad day, it doesn't matter. You got to leave that at home and focus on work. Be flexible. Don't go to your interview with a rigid agenda of questions, although, you're going to start and you'll have prepared questions. If the interview goes in another direction, follow that course if it's interesting. So there's more about note-taking in here, and there's some tips. So with taking notes, be prepared. I think it's good to record it, but you don't want to solely rely on electronic equipment. Sometimes I'm recording things on 2 different devices just to be sure. But you also want to make sure that you're taking notes. Concentrate when you hear a good quote or the start of one, write it down, and use keywords, because you're not going to just transcribe the whole thing. So you want to write down keywords and develop a shorthand system. Slow the pace, request repetition if you need it, make eye contact. There's all sorts of other tips on here. So interviewing tips, you are a reporter, not a stenographer who just receives information and transcribes it. A reporter evaluates information for its accuracy, fairness, newsworthiness, and potential to make a readable story. An interview with one source is just the beginning of reporting for most stories. For credibility and fairness, you need other sources. Human and written, that means other stories, for differing points of view and accuracy checks. So there's a section on planning the interview. You want to identify your focus. What is the purpose of this interview? Research the background. Identify your goals. Plan your questions. You have to actually request the interview. If you are going in person, you want to dress appropriately, or if you're doing an interview over Zoom, which you can record, that's another great possibility. And if you are in person, arrive on time. Conducting the interview questions can be classified as two types, closed-ended and open-ended, and you need both types. Closed-ended questions are designed to elicit brief, specific answers that are factual. Open-ended questions are designed to elicit quotes, elaboration, or longer responses. The questions that will elicit the most quotes and anecdotes start with what, why, and how. What happened? What is your reaction? What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate? Why? Why did you do that? Why do you believe? How? How did something happen? How did you accomplish that? Keep your questions brief. Ask questions in simple sentences, one question at a time. The dumb factor. I really like this. I do this sometimes. Beginning reporters often worry that they will appear dumb to sources, okay? But don't worry about what you don't know. You are there to listen and learn and not to be the expert. The whole point is to get information from the source. In fact, acting dumb can give you an advantage. Even if you know the answer to a question, you should ask it anyway so that you can get the information in the source's words. If the source gives you technical or confusing information, you might ask, could you explain that so I can write it clearly? Most sources enjoy taking the teaching role or showing off what they know. Start by using icebreakers. Okay. Introduce yourself and briefly state your purpose, establish rapport with some general conversation. It's about keeping it easy to begin with. Go easy to begin with, and then we ask the hard questions later. Plan your first question. Put your questions in a non-threatening order. Ask the basic questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. Ask follow-up questions. Keep quiet. Be non-judgmental. Control the interview. If your source rambles or prolongs an answer and you want to move the interview in another direction, don't interrupt. Sometimes actually, I think it's okay to interrupt. But if you can, wait for a natural pause before asking your next question. Repeat questions if you need to. Ask background questions. Construct a chronology. Construct a chronology. Ask about developments. And there's more here. Handle emotional questions with tact. Avoid insensitive questions. There's a saying in journalism that there are no stupid questions, only stupid answers. That's not exactly true. How do you feel about the death of your 3 children is not only a stupid question, it's insensitive as well. Instead of asking such an emotionally loaded question, ask the person to recall specific memories about his children, or ask how the person is coping with the tragedy. And end on a positive note. So there's lots of tips here. There's a section on reporting for visuals. This talks about maps or graphs or things that you can include in a web post.